Great. Thank you.
All set?
Great. So welcome everyone to tonight's presentation, Uncommon Loons, featuring Lee Attix, Director of Loon Conservation Associates. I'm Caroline Elliott with Cat Answer for Education Alliance, your host tonight. Just a little bit of housekeeping first. We have a lot of people registered for this presentation, well over 80. So because of the large number of people watching, we're gonna mute everyone during the presentation to prevent any background noise from throwing Lee off track. If during the presentation you have questions, just put them in the chat box and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. I just want to say a few things about CREA, which is hosting this. We're a Maine-based nonprofit working in environmental education. Our goal is for a sustainable future, and we work toward that by inspiring people to explore the natural world in the hopes that they will care about it. Most of our work is helping people get up close and personal with nature. We work in the schools and run a number of community programs. This speaker series is one way we help people engage with nature in the cooler months. We do these usually on the fourth Tuesday of every month, September through May, with occasional speakers at other times. If you want to see what's coming up, check the events page of our website, which is at creamaine.org. As you can see from this slide, upcoming speakers will be exploring fire on the Maine landscape, including pre-colonial use of fire. And in January, Barbara Snap will be talking about the recent decline in the bird population. It won't be all bad news though. She'll be finishing with things that you can do to support our beloved birds. Our typical programs are largely in person. So our work right now looks a little different. We did make a brief foray back into some guided nature walks with small groups. These photos are from a recent nature photography walk. That was just before the surge started, so we've stopped doing those for now until COVID cases come back down. But we hope that you are all getting outside. We have a story walk, which we've moved to a meadow behind our office space at Brunswick Landing. Story walk is a great way to get young children and their caregivers outdoors and active while enjoying a story. Our stories walk right now is featuring Beautiful Blackbird by Maine author Ashley Bryan. And so if you have children or grandchildren, we encourage you to come and enjoy it at your convenience. We have translations in French and Portuguese, so even more families can enjoy it, including new Mainers. This summer, since we couldn't run camp, we offered a variety of outdoor activities that children could do at home. We've continued, and these are samples of some of the things that we offered. We've continued in this vein this fall, distributing nature-based activity kits for children's home learning days, since a lot of the schools are on hybrid programs. We're distributing these through Mid-Coast Hunger Prevention Program and local libraries. But if you don't have, if you're not in the area, if you're anywhere, you can access all of these on our website. Just go to our website and search for Wild Wonders. Some of our most important work is with the schools, because getting young people excited about nature can lead to a lifetime of environmental awareness and action. We work primarily with elementary students because they're such a good fit for nature-based learning. Of course, right now, our work with schools looks a little bit different since we can't be in person. So we've gone from programs that look like this to programming that looks a little bit more like this. Right now, our educators are doing work with school districts, making training videos for teachers on how to teach outdoors, because that's obviously a lot safer right now. But teaching outdoors does involve a bit more planning and a few new strategies. They're also developing science activities for students' home learning days, coaching teachers on site, and more. We've just started planning for Korea Summer Camp 2021, which we're really excited about. We're just really ready to get back in person with our summer campers. So if you have children or grandchildren that are excited about summer camp, we're pretty sure we'll be able to run that this year. So that brings us full circle back to tonight's program. This program is free thanks to the generosity of our members. And if you value these dives into the natural world, I hope you'll consider joining CREA as a member. The program is also made possible by the generosity of our presenter, Lee. So a heartfelt thanks to you, Lee, for sharing your time and expertise with us tonight. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Lee is going to share his. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Lee while he pulls up his presentation. Lee Attix is director of Loon Conservation Associates. He's devoted over 20 years to loon research and conservation, leading and participating in many projects in Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, the Mid-Atlantic, and Canada. Lee's current focus is collaborating with lake associations in Maine to help them better understand the status of their current loon populations and to guide them in implementing beneficial conservation measures. Lee is currently working with the Keyser Lake Watershed Association, the Little Sebago Lake Association, Belgrade Lakes Association, Watchik Lake Association, the Somes Maine Wildlife Sanctuary, and others. And I think Lee may be hoping to get a few new citizen scientists out of this presentation because I know he does a lot of work with them. So I'm going to give it to you, Lee, to take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Caroline. And it's really a treat to be here tonight. I'm speaking to all of you from my home office in Portland, Maine. Usually I'm a little further afield, but at this time of the year, kind of hunkered down here in the office doing reports and looking at data. But I'm really excited to get a chance to talk to this group, and congratulations, by the way, Caroline, to all the work that you guys do. And it's a great honor to be able to talk to this group tonight. So we're gonna look first at some loon natural history. It seems like a loon talk without some natural history, just, you know, have to have it in there somewhere. And then we're going to segue into details of a new conservation effort in Maine that I'm leading starting 2 years ago. So when we look at natural history, we're going to look a little bit at the physical characteristics of loons, their diet, vocalizations, breeding, nesting, and migration, and wintering. And so physical characteristics, what is it? How do we identify a loon? What is it that's unique about them versus other birds? And so here, as we see in these two images, the first thing I'm going to show you with my cursor here is this distinctive red eye. Anybody that's been on the water or near the water and seen a loon at all close on a sunny day, this is going to just pop right out. And obviously that's a key eyeball that they have to be able to find, you know, food underwater, catch fish, all those other things. And they've got this brilliant black and white plumage, checkered on the back, spotted off on the flanks. And then what they're known for is this necklace here and here around the neck and throat area. And they're very large birds. So, you know, one of the first things, if you're seeing other birds that may confuse you on the water, is there's nothing, at least on lakes in New England, that comes close to the size of a common loon. You're talking about 10 to 14 pounds on average. Males larger than that. I think the largest male still on record is a male that we captured and banded on Rangeley Lake, that was over 14 pounds. So you're talking about the weight of a full-size adult bald eagle at that point. So very large, heavy bird. And part of that weight is the density of their bones. Here you see a skeleton of a loon as it would be in a diving position. It was originally reported in some of the early literature that loons were solid bone, and that is incorrect. They're not solid, but they are very dense. And that really helps them dive quickly and rapidly and to move with great skill and speed underwater. And talk about speed, here's where it comes from. Here's a bird that we were banding, and you can see the size of this really large webbed foot, and this is an adult here on the left. But when you look at the right, that chick is still all in downy, which I would estimate that chick to be perhaps 3 weeks old. And look at the size of the foot there for that little chick. They are amazing, and that's how they can move rapidly, as well as they can turn on a dime in the water. And then this really large, distinctive black bill, used for effective foraging, as well as defense. These can be fierce weapons, and trust me, if you ever have an adult loon in hand, like we do when we're doing some of our capture and banding work, it's a very dangerous weapon. We have to secure that quite quickly. And I found out firsthand a couple of years ago banding on Little Sebago, where I actually got bit. That's a very sharp, almost razor-like edge that threatened to send me off for some stitches. So so not to be confused with the title of this slide, but what is it that loons, or what species do people most commonly confuse them with? If you look at these pictures and these big blowups, you think, oh, that doesn't look anything like a loon. But for people that are not used to seeing loons and see a bird, particularly from a distance, that's a good diver, and you've got the on the left there a double-crested cormorant, and then on the right the male merganser. Both of these, although again, if you look in these pictures, geez, that doesn't look anything like a loon. But you know, I myself, even when I'm on a lake and I first see my binoculars a long ways away, particularly this black and white that you get from a common merganser male, that makes me look a second time. But you know, neither one of those are common loons. So diet, I found this kind of comical drawing on the internet, and to lead us into a few slides here about what loons consume for the most part. And I can tell you that it's not an avocado, but fish. Fish is certainly the primary component of loon's diet. This is actually a male loon on Watchik Lake in Standish, Maine, that I was monitoring and following in the fall as part of a fall migration study I did, and he had just caught this big fat sunfish. I would say to you that that's somewhat unusual, and that sunfish are big and round, a little bit harder for a loon to swallow because they're going to swallow that fish whole. But they catch the fish like this, sideways in the bill, and then they turn. I hope people can hear me now. I'm unmuted. Okay, so I'm going to continue here. So anyway, I would say that by and large, loons tend so a sunfish is somewhat unusual. I'd say yellow perch, smallmouth bass, pickerel, salmon, trout even are probably a larger part of their diet, but this loon did successfully swallow that fat sunfish. And then crayfish. Crayfish is a common part of their diet, and we find them, you know, when we do capture a loon and you know, examine them, we will find that crayfish is a key part of their diet. this was a surprise, is crabs. For me, I didn't learn about loons eating crabs until, I'm going to say about 4, maybe 5 years ago. This is a loon on an ocean in winter plumage. And now that I've learned this, because I haven't studied loons on the ocean, it turns out that this is their primary diet off the coast of Maine here when they're wintering. And I said to the photographer who gave me this photo, how do they swallow that crab? The answer was that they basically rip off the legs and then they swallow the body whole. So that's fairly new knowledge for me. And, vocalizations, I think for myself speaking, I probably heard a loon call before I first ever saw one and was so captivated by that. It's quite an experience to be beside a lake, particularly in the evening when loons are pretty vocal, and to have them calling. And I'm looking on my iPhone here now because I'm going to play for you some of these calls, starting with the first one there, which is the hoot. So that's a hoot call, a single syllable phrase, most often used for very close, intimate communication. Quite often when birds are thinking about nesting and they're doing courtship, they may be in close to shore somewhere, right next to one another, circling, as we'll see in some pictures later on. And you did hear that kind of almost more than just the single phrase. There were those kind of drawn out calls. And as I have on this slide, the very last call there is what I've titled as a mewing or a courtship call that I've heard a lot. Sometimes it can even sound almost like soft, not aggressive, but almost like soft growling noises that they're making during this courtship period. That is not officially identified anywhere as a loon call, but the more I hear it, the more I think it should be. So let's move on then and go to the next call, which is very common. And this is some examples of a whale call. So a whale call, kind of a general location call. Where are you? I'm over here. I hear this when loons are on the water, both adults and adults with young, trying to find one another or call a mate in. I also see it or witness it quite a bit when loons are nesting. So maybe the one bird that's on nest is ready to get off of nest and it's calling its mate in. But if you notice that one last phrase there, these can really vary from 1 or 2 syllables up to 3 or 4 or 5 syllables, and they can really vary from bird to bird or instance to instance. So now let's go and listen to a tremolo call, and I've got 2 here to share with you. This is the tremolo. So that call is often interpreted as agitated, and I don't necessarily agree with that from my own experience. I see it as birds that are alerted, and I would say excited. It might be alarmist if a person or threat, a predator is, too close to a loon or to a loon family, they might use it in that case. But I've also seen it used a lot It's the only call, by the way, that I've ever heard in flight. And it is quite common that they make that call in flight. And it's also common that you'll hear these duets or choruses where more than one bird will be doing it simultaneously. And I'm going to play a duet or a chorus right now for you. So a couple of loons going back and forth in what some people would term as a duet. And I will say that loons are very vocal during a hatching event, which is a little bit unusual because you think they would want to be kind of flying under the radar, not wanting to draw attention as they're hatching these young chicks that are vulnerable to predators. But I find that they're actually very vocal. And sometimes I feel those calls are used as part of almost a joyous celebration expressing happiness and joy. And then the final one we're gonna listen to that I'll play for you here is the yodel, which the yodel is only made by the male loon. So if you hear this and are seeing the bird, you can identify that it's a male by this call. So most of those, there were a few whale calls mixed in there as birds were talking back and forth, but that is a male primarily that you were hearing there yodeling. And that is a very common call that you'll hear at night because males are out defending territory while females are incubating eggs. And then also, if you pay attention and a male loon starts yodeling, look up to the sky or cast an ear to the sky because you'll quite often find an airplane. Airplanes cause male loons to yodel. We think it's because they are some way threatened. They feel that they're a big predator, perhaps. But it's almost like clockwork here in Maine that if a seaplane flies over, loons will start yodeling. So let's move on now to the breeding portion of the talk and looking at loons when they're first back in the spring. So loons, when they're not in territory and nesting, are social creatures. And you will in spring and fall, in spring when ice is first out, and then in fall, before they've migrated for the winter, you will see them in these large social groups. I think this slide here on the left, there's 8 loons and 5 on the one on the right. You know, those are decent sized rafts, but I actually one time on Great Pond in Belgrade counted a raft of 40 together. And then during migration, some of the larger reservoirs in Massachusetts, they've had hundreds at a time on some of these water bodies. So they can really get quite large. But on a Maine lake, you know, I'd say 40 would probably be the upward end of what you would see. So this will last for a week or two before birds start thinking about pairing up like we see here in these slides. And beautiful image here on the left of a pair of loons actually in a spring snowstorm on the water. But they will begin to think about pairing up and defending a territory fairly quickly within a few weeks from when they're back if they're intent on breeding and nesting. And when they're approaching nesting time, you will get these really spectacular, I talked about that, that hoot and mewing sound they'll make. You get these beautiful times where they'll come right in close to shore, like these two pictures. These are pictures I took. In the one on the left is one from Long Pond and Belgrade Lakes, actually. And then the one on the right is from the territory on Little Sebago Lake. And, you know, it's just really special to get to sit calmly and watch a pair of birds like this come together and do this gentle. They have their bill in the down position we call bill dipping. And it's really a beautiful thing to witness. I had to show you that picture when we talk about bill dipping. It's just an extraordinary photograph. I'm really fortunate that I've made some good friends doing this work over the past 20 years that are extraordinary photographers. I don't have the time with everything I do and nor the equipment to get photos like this. But that's just a stunning view of a male and female loon doing this courtship where they will dip their bills like this, pointed down, and circle slowly around one another. And if all goes well in the courtship and things move along, then we will have a nesting event. And in this case, as you can see from the dates, this was actually in June of 2018. This was a loon to set this scene. This was a loon I was monitoring nest building on a small lake in Lovell, Maine, as part of my work with the Keezer Lake Watershed Associate. I noticed the loon nest building and not really paying much attention to me. I gently nudged my kayak on shore about a couple hundred feet to the left and sat there watching. And it was on the nest initially and then came off and was doing grabbing these aquatic vegetation and throwing it over their back, in some cases onto their back, if you see right there, to get the material in the water. The nest is actually right up here, and they will throw it over their back into the water close to the nest, then they'll go and pick it up and take it up onto the actual nest itself. But this was a highlight experience for me, because you'll see in the next slide, this bird actually let me quietly sneak closer in my kayak, and I was able to actually shoot this video that you're going to see. I'm in my kayak. The front of my kayak is literally about right here. And so maybe about 10 feet from this bird. And I'm shooting this video with my iPhone. It was really, really a special moment here. Let's play this. So isn't that something? All loons are different, and you really need to read their behavior. And certainly I'm respectful of not wanting to disturb loons in the nesting phase, but I read this bird's body language and that it basically paid no attention to my being there. Eventually, the mate did come in and help as well. And at that point, I chose to gently slide away. A memory that will be with me forever. And so during this nest building and moving on to hopefully egg laying, we have the copulation event. And like a lot of wildlife, it's not anything that lasts very long. The birds, this is the female here, will climb on shore first. The male will follow her, and the male will climb on her back like this. Often will splay his wings out for balance because he's trying to teeter there. And it probably lasts all of about 10 seconds. And then he'll kind of, loons are pretty clumsy on land. He'll kind of fall off to the water side and go back in the water. And she'll typically follow him in fairly short order. And that can happen at the spot where they're actually going to nest, or it can happen at random other places that they may choose to do that. And if successful, within 24 hours of that, actually the egg is fully formed, which is just a miracle. They can fully form that egg in just such a short period of time. And a single egg will be laid. And sometimes they'd only lay one egg, but then in other cases, they will lay two. And I would say it's probably about half and half how many nests have a single egg versus two. You will rarely, see 3 eggs. Unfortunately, this was a nest that was predated on Keyser Lake in Lovell that we found. You can tell it was predated by a mammal because there's these fairly big pieces of shell that have been broken open that are licked totally clean. If it were a bird that got that egg, like an eagle or something else, likely be a hole in the egg, and you would still have a lot of goop and liquid material in there, but you've got the remains of 1 egg there and a second, and then this was actually a whole egg that we were able to collect and run analysis on. But that was a 3-egg clutch before it was some small unknown mammal got to it. To give you a sense of a loon egg and its size compared to some good old brown chicken eggs here, the loon egg there on the right with olive green to brown, dark brown color with these very dark brown speckled spots. And the size of those, the number really varies egg to egg, just almost like our human skin tone and how many freckles or not that we have. It's a good probably comparison. And then loons nesting. It's astounding to me how, what do I want to say? How different loon nests are. And that some are incredibly well hidden. This is, I think it still shows up pretty well on the slide, but there's the loon right there. And so that brush is going to continue to fill in throughout the nesting period. And eventually you're not going to see that bird at all. And I have seen cases where I've been right along shore in a kayak looking for doing nest surveys and go right by one, don't even know that it's there. They're that well hidden. And then other times they are right out in the wide open, even more so than this. This one at least has brush on one side. I've seen them on little hummocks, floating bog mats in marshy areas where loons like to nest, and they have nothing around them. So not only are they subject to easy sighting from predators, avian and otherwise, but also from potential human disturbance. That's a large bird that is fairly easily seen and sometimes will draw the attention of people wanting to get a closer look. And if all goes well, in 27 to 28 days, we will have the hatching event. And in this case, we have an image of a single chick that is already hatched, fully out of the shell. And when they're first hatched, they literally will sit just in the palm of your hand. They wouldn't even take up any of your finger space. It would just be your palm of your hand. And they're this very dark brown downy, which will lighten fairly quickly as even in that first 2 weeks. And in this case, there's a second egg. I don't know whether this loon the adults came back to incubate that. Sometimes loons will abandon for some reason a second egg and leave it, and it never hatches. In this case, I don't know about that one. I can share with you in this beautiful intimate picture that we did have 2 chicks hatch here. This was actually from a live loon cam on the mid-coast that I helped launch back in the early 2000s, where we had live video streaming on the internet. I don't know if any of you might have come across that out there, but we were monitoring loons 24 hours a day with infrared at night with camera equipment with powerful zoom lenses on them. And if you look very carefully, so here again, we have 1 chick hatched and we have the adult in the nest. But the important indicator here is that the second chick is in the process of hatching, is that right there. So that is a very small hole that the second chick has started to make in that egg. It doesn't show up in this picture very well, but these chicks have a little calcium deposit right on the upper tip of their bill called an egg tooth that helps them to break through a fairly hardy shell when they are first hatching. And if 2 chicks hatch, they are in the water pretty much immediately. First chick will probably be in as soon as it's dry. The other adult may remain in the nest, and that 1 chick until the second one hatches, if it does hatch, may come and go, or it may stay with the other adult. In this case, we have 2 adults in the water. We have 1 chick in the water with them. And then we have a second chick up here, may still be drying out a bit. Chances are those adults are trying to call that chick from the nest down into the pond. That's a pretty easy journey for that chick to kind of push itself down that embankment. I've seen some really difficult ones where they have to get over sticks and rocks, and they kind of tumble and do somersaults, and can be quite fascinating and captivating to watch. And very quickly, very first day, they are fed, and they're fed very, very tiny minnows here. That's a very tiny minnow that these 2 chicks are vying for, and that happens pretty much right away. And who can, I have to show this, I have to show this slide, you know, getting a lift, back riding, very common that chicks will climb up on adults for safety, for warmth. They will hide them under their wings, and they will rest there. They will get warm there. They will be safer, I should say, at least from predators there than they would be in the water. And they are, you know, probably having some fun, I would say, as well. And they grow quite rapidly. This chick is, from my observation, probably 5 or close to 6 weeks old. See, it's getting some raggedy around the head and has feathers here on the flanks that have started to sheathe. And you can see how light brown that is, but that's how fast that chick has gotten to 5 to 6 weeks. At 4 weeks, they're still completely downy, although light brown in color. And then in that 5th week, they start shedding, and they just continue to get kind of more raggedy looking. But when you double that time to 10 to 12 weeks, now you have this handsome chick, beautiful light gray, brown plumage, and an identifying marker of chicks, which when you look at adult loons molting in the fall and they get this same light coloration, it can be hard to distinguish the two. The distinguishing marker is these light tips on the feathers. This, what we call scalloping, that chicks have. It's very uniform. If you look at that line of feathers, it's one after another with these light tips. And the adults will not have that. And that is the easiest way to tell if you're looking at a chick or young of the year versus a heavily molted adult. And then what happens after all this exciting stuff? I'm often asked, where do loons go in the winter? And we know quite certain where they go. We only have, you know, data on satellite transmitter data on a few loons. They don't tolerate transmitters very well, but we do have enough other information to show that they go to the coast or to southern lakes. But before that, they go through this molting process. And here's a beautiful loon feather on the water. And if you happen to be on the water in the fall, it's a great chance to see and get photographs of loon feathers that loons have molted prior to their fall migration. And this is the very first thing you're going to see. You're going to see what I call a gray chin. And when it's very first happening, you just get this little bit of gray here, and it can lighten coloration of the bill as well. But this is the very first thing you see. That's the beginning of a molting process of an adult loon in the fall. And this will quickly move, when I say quickly, over weeks, it'll move into the cheeks where they'll get all gray in here. This was a kind of furry guy that I used to see often in photograph on Watchik Lake in Standish. And this is what I call a medium molt. So see, they've lost most of the black now. They're going that gray brownish color. You see a feather actually releasing from the back of the head or neck. You begin to see this black and white pattern all breaks down, and they totally change from what they look like in breeding. And then you've got this even further along, and they will lose all of those little spots and everything as time goes. And you can see how much that head looks like the picture of the chick that we looked at earlier. So that bird's almost fully molted. And eventually, 10 taking flight. And if you've ever seen a loon get off the water, being that they're as heavy as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, takes them a long ways, and they both use their wings, flapping their wings, but they also use those great big feet. That's where you have all this splashing. They're running on the surface of the water with those great big feet until they can get enough lift to fly and get airborne. And another stunning photo from some good friends in Washington State of a loon just getting airborne off the water. And they are capable flyers, although I will say that look at the size of the wing, and when you compare that wing to a bald eagle, so common loon, full-size adult in Maine, same size or weight as, same weight, I should say, not size, as a bald eagle, but probably half or less of the wing mass. So a bald eagle can do a fairly gentle wing flapping and stay airborne quite easily. Loons are beating their wings many more times per minute to fly and stay airborne. So they burn a lot more calories when they're flying. And I had to show you that in spectacular image of loons, as I entitled, Almost Over the Moon. And so here's a map depicting where our loons are in summer, what their summer range is, and their winter range. So, and at least for common loon. So all up and down the eastern seaboard and down into the Gulf of Mexico for wintering range. And then we have common loons that are in the West Coast as well, that move up off of Canada. And then in terms of summer range, we have in the United States anyway, just here in New England down into Massachusetts. We have had some, most of our Maine birds are gonna be right in the New England area here, maybe as far down as Rhode Island, but from a few satellite transmitters, we have found some birds down here in the Mid-Atlantic, maybe even as far south as Carolinas, but not down here. The birds that are mostly down here are coming from Wisconsin and Minnesota, Michigan area. So that concludes natural history, and I'm gonna segue now to the year of 2017 and kind of fate grabbing a hold of me as I found myself in somewhat of a career transition and wondering at 62 what I was going to do with the rest of my working days. And I just kind of had a moment to take a breath and think about loons in Maine and what we were doing and what we weren't doing. And it was kind of an aha moment, a new vision, but this is what the recognition was. And that was that all other states with sizable loon populations are doing more than Maine. And I didn't really like that. And then several states are getting the work done using mostly volunteer citizen scientists. And then that word underlined, sustainable. Loons are not endangered. Loons, by all accounts, are doing reasonably well, although I don't think in Maine we have enough data to truly know from just the loon count that Audubon does on a broad scale, but it's just one day of the year. So in order to make any kind of a broader conservation or monitoring effort, it's going to have to happen through volunteer citizen scientists in order for it to be sustainable, because there's not going to be funding to pay people like me and Mass to be out there doing this work. And when I talk about all those other states, so here's where you got your primary populations of common loons in the United States. So Washington State has a small population, Wyoming, Minnesota and Wisconsin, big populations, New York, a sizable population, Vermont and New Hampshire, Massachusetts, all sizable populations. And those are all states that are doing a lot of work on monitoring loons and extensive conservation efforts to help them, in some cases, recover from depleted numbers from decades ago. And then you've got Maine here. And that kind of bugged me to think about that and think that we really lag behind all the other states, and that not New York, but Vermont, as I mentioned, and Wisconsin, those two states are getting almost all their loon work done, which is extensive, through a few staff people that run the programs, and everything else is volunteer citizen scientists. So that was the aha moment, a recognition of what we weren't doing or what we were that was not enough, and what others were doing that, why can't Maine do that? So that got me started, that got me focused back in 2017. But why might we do this? What's the reason besides Lee Attix saying, oh, geez, we need to be doing more? Well, here's some good reasons. Lakes and loons are under increasing threats. So development, global warming, and as I say here in the last thing, global warming predictions by some are grim. I think it was National Audubon said if we meet even some of the more modest global warming projections, the common loons may be gone from the United States and of all be in Canada. I don't necessarily agree with that, but we definitely have things that we are concerned about. Their loons are sentinels of lake water quality. So large aquatic bird, top of the food chain on a lake. They are eating fish, small fish, and crayfish, which, when we're looking at toxins that are building up in these lakes, we see this in the body burden of loons. And it helps us monitor what's going on in those lakes. So mercury is one of those things. And there's some other metals that we're looking at. And then loons are subject to catastrophic loss and sudden population decline. So you have these large wintering events, quite often like a oil tanker off the coast of Rhode Island a few decades ago ran aground and spilled a whole bunch of oil and killed a whole bunch of loons, unfortunately through oil contamination. And then we have a number of lakes already identified in New England where suddenly, for unknown reasons that we're still trying to figure out, we went from having a fairly large, robust population to, steep and rapid decline of that population that we're still trying to understand why that is. So there's really a lot more for us to learn. And so what are the objectives? Along with Benny Binoculars here on the right, our volunteer citizen science, I'm attempting to grow a program here where we're following the successful models in the other states that I mentioned, particularly Vermont and Wisconsin, to develop broader scale loon conservation efforts by recruiting and training volunteers to conduct in-depth loon monitoring surveys, and also to collaborate with individuals and lake associations to implement specific sustainable conservation measures to benefit loons. Some of those would be artificial nest rafts, signage and wardening of existing nests to try to help with disturbance issues, education of the public through many means, including talks like this that I'm doing tonight, etc. And let me go back here. So specific monitoring goals. When we look at what all those other states are doing much more in depth than what we capture through the Audubon loon count, they are on a broad scale basis. They're identifying everywhere there are territorial pairs of loons, that they're determining if and where they nest, and if chicks do hatch, and then if the chicks survive. And there are annual local New England meetings as well as national meetings that all these groups attend from all these other states that have all this data, where they really know the status of their population, and Maine doesn't have a seat at that table. And I'm trying, with the help of citizen scientists, to change that. So what have we already accomplished just in, and by the way, I'm Lee Attix. I'm on my own little gig here, and it's me and anybody I can draft to come along on this journey. But just in the first 3 years. So 2018 was our first year of doing this. And in that year, we got data from 21 different lakes and 43 territorial pairs. And we had a pretty significant jump in that in 2019. 5 new lakes were added and another 69 territorial pairs we're monitoring. In 2020, there was small growth. It would have been larger, but that good old thing called COVID-19 got in the way of a lot of plans, and we had to, some projects got canceled, and then we had to scale some things back. But still, I'm pretty thrilled to have that kind of success just in 3 years. And this is what it looks like for you on a map. And I hope that you can see that the circles here, these red circles, are the larger areas where we're working right now. And so Kezar Lake Watershed Association over here in the Lovell area up in the Belgrades, the Belgrade Lakes Association on Mount Desert Island over here. I started a loon project there in 2003. That funding lasted for 5 years through 2008. This is a perfect example of how scientists like myself can come in, work with a local group of enthusiastic, dedicated citizen scientists. And that project, with the help of Billy Halpern at the Soamesman All Wildlife Sanctuary, runs a great deal through volunteer citizen science, and they've kept that program going since 2008, so 12 years. And they have spectacular data over there on how the loons are doing. And then the last circle here is Little Sebago Lake Association. And then you have these little yellow dots, which are some individual lakes spread around where we're gathering some data. Pretty exciting stuff. And training that I've been talking about through a grant. Last year, I was able to create, develop, and implement a one-day training curriculum for volunteer citizen scientists, where we do a half day in the classroom and a half day in the field. And so far to date, we trained over 20 first time. We affectionately call these folks Loon Rangers. And I borrowed that from the folks in Wisconsin who use that, and I liked it. I would say to you that that number would be quite a bit higher. We had a lot of plans to train folks this year that we had to cancel due to state mandates about group gatherings and being wise and cautious. I want to briefly here now, I'm going to try to wrap up fairly quickly, but I'm going to just show you quickly. I grabbed a few slides from that actual training workshop. So envision yourself in a classroom with some other citizen scientists, and we're gonna do just a couple of slides here on the topic of loon behaviors and what they mean. And this is really critical to convey this to volunteer citizen scientists so they can begin to understand what these behaviors mean and what loons are up to. And this segment of the training module is much more extensive than what I'm going to show you here, but due to time constraints, I just grabbed a few slides. So a good old wing flap is very common. Birds raise up out of the water and spread their wings and will flap them back and forth. And we believe this is mostly preening, lining of feathers and stretching. But I also believe birds a lot, as part of defending territory, will make themselves look big, and hear the loons puffing its big white chest out, and I do believe that they use it as part of posturing. This is my territory, and you're best to stay out of it, kind of thing. And then this is what we call a roll preen. So this loon is actually on its side, using its bill to preen its breast feathers, and the leg will be out of the water. And oftentimes you will actually see this in combination with, they'll move that foot back and forth, what we call a foot waggle, with the foot actually splayed out. And when we're looking to identify our banded loons, this is really helpful, because bands go on these legs, and that's how we see them. I really wanted to show this to everyone because this is something fairly common as part of preening that loons do, and we get a lot of calls distress calls that are misinterpreting this behavior as a loon in trouble that needs help, and we go all the way there and there's nothing the matter with the bird. You will see loons just thrash around in the water. This bird is almost hitting the water like a torpedo. Wings are whapping on the water, raising up like this, shaking its head and wings all very, very aggressively. And then they will actually flip sometimes completely upside down, do a 360, and come shooting back out of the water. And this can go on for 5 or 10 minutes. And that loon is not in distress. That loon is practicing common, what we call bathing. And then territorial defense. If you Google, and tonight even after this presentation, loon courtship, I'm shocked at the misinformation that you will find online, because what I mostly found is videos of pictures like this that they are misinterpreting, badly misinterpreting, as courtship. On the left here, we have a pair of loons doing what's called wing rowing. This is part of territorial defense, where birds will chase each other, very, very taxing on loons. They use their wings to propel themselves across the water, and one bird is chasing the other, trying to defend territory. And when they escalate to something beyond that, where one loon gets tired and the other one can catch it, they will actually fight. And here this loon's actually trying to grab a hold of this other one from the back. But that is not courtship. That is territorial defense, a very aggressive behavior that we see in loons. And then finally in this, I think this is the last slide for this, is peering. So loons peer, put their head in the water, look underwater for many reasons. They do it a lot for finding prey, to catch fish, crayfish, and other things. But they also do it to look below the surface of the water when other loons are around, because loons will attack from underneath the surface. And we have recovered dead loons that we've actually found multiple punctures in their sternum, where another loon has actually come up from under the water and pierced their sternum, collapsing along. So they want to know where all the loons are that are underwater anytime they're in close proximity and circling. Those are just a few examples of some key behaviors. And here you're going to get to see that in video. This is a wing flap. Peering. This bird's actually peering and foraging, and that was a tail waggle that you just saw there. Here we're doing some more peering, and you can see its head moving back and forth. It's actually looking for prey. And here we get the roll preen rolling on its side. So these are great video of a loon that I got to. Again, I'm doing this with my iPhone on a lake up in Bethel. And again, the peering, you can see by its moving along and looking like that, it's actually foraging, looking for food. So that's a quick video to show you that. And I am promising we're going to wrap up here. So accomplishments from a conservation point of view. We conducted multiple public presentations each year. We've increased the protection of loon nesting sites through signage and warning. And we've increased raft usage by better placement of existing rafts and strategic introductions of new rafts. So those are things beyond the actual monitoring piece where we're gathering the data. These are ways we're engaging with the public and citizen scientists to get real beneficial conservation measures in place. And I'll share a last brief story about one of those. That was a great success story this year. This is a picture of a raft. I'm sorry it's not a better image, but this is a new raft that we floated on Long Pond and Belgrade Lakes this year. And the loons were always nesting on the mainland here. There are no islands for them to nest on, and getting predated by small mammals. And so we decided it was a good application to try a raft. They did not use it initially, but there was actually, and it's really hard to see, but trust me, there's actually a mallard right there that is nesting. And the mallards had been on there for a few weeks, we thought there were no way, once we saw that the loons were going to go in there and nest. And guess what? Much to our surprise and delight, loons decided to start using the raft themselves. And we had a loon incubating eggs here on the front and a mallard back here in the back. And just a couple of days after that, the loons put down, they laid 2 eggs in this case. The mallard hatched, I believe, 7 little ducklings, and off they went. And the loons continued to use the raft. And I'm really, really happy to say that they successfully hatched a chick and fledged a chick from there. Only one of the 2 eggs hatched, but it did fledge. And it's the first time we've had a chick fledge in that territory in at least a decade or more. So very, very exciting, and a great story to share with you here to kind of wrap things up. And so how can you help? Spread the word. You know, we have thanks to such a large and interested audience tonight. You can volunteer to monitor a lake or territory with loons. If you don't live on a lake, you don't have to live on a lake. If you frequent a lake that you know have loons, that can be very helpful to volunteer to kind of adopt that lake to help us figure out what's going on with loons. And then to certainly be respectful of loons and sensitive loon habitat. So a few photo acknowledgements I mentioned. These are people that I'm grateful to for allowing me to use photos. And then lastly, I'm going to leave you with this wonderful sunset picture over a New England lake as the sun sets on that day of that image, and the sun sets on this presentation. Thanks so much. It has been great to talk with all of you, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Can you hear me, Lee?
I can.
Oh, okay, great. So I'm going to go through the questions that are in the chat, and then if other people feel free to add additional questions to the chat, or when I've gone through these questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question of Lee directly. So the first one was, will loons possibly eat the invasive green crabs?
That's a good question. I wouldn't see why they would not. You know, a crab's a crab. Haven't seen any pictures yet of that, but I would certainly think that they would be on the menu.
They'd have to eat a lot.
Yes, they would.
To make a dent.
Yeah.
If loons are like humans when mating, do they, in the spur of the moment, pair with another loon?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question. I will say this, that when loons were first banded, which goes back to the 1980s now, prior to that, the belief was that loons mated for life. What we have found out through the banding process is that that's not true, that loons will stay together sometimes for multiple years and sometimes not. And we don't really know what causes necessarily changes in partners from year to year or from lake to lake, but we've had loons that have had many mates over their lifetime as we've monitored them. And we have actually witnessed, I think there was a female when I was doing some work down in Massachusetts that I believe they actually saw her breed with 3 different males in the same year. I'm going to leave that one alone, but it does get kind of interesting out there sometimes.
A few Maine loons are being transferred to Massachusetts in an attempt to restore populations there. Can you comment on that?
I can, and I actually co-led that program with Biodiversity Research Institute for 5 years prior to doing what I'm doing now. And there were, I don't know if any of you might have seen it, but there was just a program on NPR about that, and really, really exciting news that they had, so that we moved the first chicks down there in I think it was 2015. Yeah, 2015, 2016, 2017, we moved the first batch of chicks down there. And we had them come back right away. And we had the first case just this past breeding season of successful nesting, where one of the banded, it was a male from New York State, I believe, that successfully hooked up with a unbanded female and nested on one of the lakes down there. This area is down where they're moving the birds, is down towards New Bedford, Mass, near the coast, where there's a large group of lakes that are all drinking water supply. There's very few, if any, houses on them. They're heavily protected and they have beautiful loon habitat. And so that program has been incredible. Nobody had ever done this before with loons. It's worked very well with a lot of other species where there have been problems with loss of the population, as it was with loons in Massachusetts. So yeah, it's been a huge success.
Great. There was we had in a prior program on puffins, they talked about the puffin restoration effort and having to put, they were unsuccessful initially, and they pioneered, I guess, an effort to, or a practice of putting extensive decoys around. And it was partly because they were social creatures and weren't comfortable sort of coming to a new site until there was evidence that other puffins were there. Has that, so it sounds like that hasn't been the case with the loons, where even though they're social creatures and there are no loons there, once you put them there, they'll stay?
Yes, so, you know, I think they've only documented, there were approximately 30 chicks that were moved in the first 3 years down there. And I think they've found maybe 7 or 8 of them that are back. I was the one to find the first one back in year 2. So another misnomer out there about loon juveniles, or so second year birds, is that you'll see often in the literature, or people will say that loons remain on the ocean for the first 3 years. That's not necessarily true. They do not breed and they don't come in to breed, but you will see second year loons, not in breeding plumage, so what we call juveniles, that will be spotted on lakes around New England throughout the summer. And they kind of come and go. They obviously don't have territories or anything. But yes, Caroline, I have to say that it was a massive undertaking what we did down there and what they're still doing. I mean, we had to erect these large pens in shallow water to rear these chicks and hand feed them from blinds where they wouldn't get imprinted on us as humans. And there's a lot that could have gone wrong. And I have to say, even as I talk about it now, I'm stunned at how well it went and how few, if any, complications we had. I would say the biggest one might have been, just like we as humans vary. I know I was not a picky eater as a kid. My gosh, my mom had to put me on a diet before I was 1. I ate anything that she would put in front of me. But then my siblings were awful to try to feed. We had some real tough times getting some of these chicks to feed initially. Others would come in and they'd eat anything you'd release. We were getting local fish from live fish, small minnows from a local fish hatchery, and putting them in through a tube into the water that the loons would have to catch on their own. And for some of these guys, it was work. It was really work to get them to feed. But otherwise, you know, everything, they adapted really well. When we released them from the pens, we only had 1 chick at a pen in a pen at a time, released them onto the water. They foraged fantastic on their own in the wild from that without any. We would have a few that would want to come back hanging around for a free meal around the pens. But compared to what we thought we might encounter, it really, really went well.
That's great. Mary asks, where would you recommend going in Florida to see loons in the winter?
Boy, almost, it's really kind of hard to tell. I haven't spent, I've been down to Florida a bit. I haven't spent much time along the coast, but pretty much anywhere. You could see them, but they can be pretty far offshore too. I know around here in Maine, I'll almost always see them if I go down to in Scarborough to Ferry Beach. I'll almost always see a few down there. I'll see them here in Casco Bay, right in Portland Harbor, popping around. But in terms of Florida, I couldn't give anything specific, unfortunately.
I bet probably the local Audubon chapter would know, and I think eBird and some of those.
Yeah,
sites
that's a great
would
suggestion, actually. Yeah.
be a good resource to
Yeah.
find out where people are seeing loons.
Yeah.
Lisa asks, what guidance do you give adults and teens as to safe and appropriate distance to be in their kayaks from the loons? Also, what behaviors would loons display if kayaks got too close for their comfort?
Those are great questions. I tried to talk about that a little bit with the video that I shared of that loon nest building. I obviously, in doing the work I'm doing, get close to loons, including capturing and banding them quite often. For the general public, we absolutely say caution is the word and give them more space than less. Certainly a lot of vocalizing. If you see a loon, when I do the training piece, that's one of the things I talk about. I didn't show those slides, but you can tell a loon that's calm will be, here's my hand, will be just kind of level, flat, head kind of down and relaxed in that position. If you see that loon change behavior, head up and gets alerted, looking around, looking at you, looking over its shoulder at you as you keep trying to get closer to it and it's trying to get away from you, those are all signs that you're starting to change the behavior of that loon and you want to just allow it to move away or you move away. And certainly with nests, there's again, we show this in the training video, there's something we call the hangover position. Loons, when they're threatened on nest, they will pancake down flat, so their head goes right down and flat along the nest, and that's what we call the hangover position. And if you're seeing any of that, if you're not seeing the bird totally relaxed, just kind of looking around, you need to move away.
Well, that's great guidance. Susan asks, what is the lifespan of loons?
That is a really good timing on that question. We're just starting to dig more as we try to find times in the margins of our very busy research lives to look at that more in depth. And I actually co-led an effort to look at some of this. The oldest loon I believe we know right now is one in Michigan, banded loon that is over 30 years old. We believed until recently that 30 probably would have been the upper end, but we now have, including right here in Maine, on Little Sebago Lake, we have a female there that we banded in 1997, and approximate age of first nesting for loons or breeding is 5 to 6 years old. And I would, so we estimate her now to be like 31. Really interesting fact I want to share on that. When we looked at this, and we had 42 birds we identified, mostly from New England, that were at least 20 years old or older. When we looked at that group, subset of loons, 42 adults, I believe it was 80% of them in the year we looked at their current activity were still actively breeding and produced young.
Wow.
So that tells me that there's something linked between, long-term survival and our best breeders out there. There's some link there. So.
Lisa asks, she says, I spend 1 week per summer on a Maine lake. Is there something someone can do in that short a period of time? I assume in the realm of loons and citizen science.
It's really hard in that case. That's probably the biggest challenge we face in trying to get this work done through citizen science volunteers is, particularly as you get further north and more remote in Maine. When I say further north, even to Augusta and Bangor. We're not going to work above that area, but it gets harder and harder to find people who actually live on the lakes. Even people that are seasonal often don't spend more than July and August there, although they might have this year and they might next year. But it is a challenge for us. Unfortunately, someone who just spends a week, besides just kind of practicing some of the behaviors we talked about and reporting anything of value, it really can't help us from a research perspective, because we have to visit these lakes fairly frequently to gather the data we're looking to gather.
Pat says, an early slide showed a group of friendly loons, but when the single loon was watching in the water below for loon predators, what happened pre-mating and post-mating? Not sure I understand exactly. Pat, can you unmute and clarify? Oh, I'm not sure she's able to.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand that either. Do you want to read it again or just move on?
We'll move on. And Pat, if you want to clarify your question at the bottom of the chat, that would be great. This is a great question because I had it myself. The question is, do chicks get taken by snapping turtles? And I once saw a seagull get taken by a snapping turtle from below. It was, on the water, and it started flapping and it was clearly trying to get away, and it slowly got, and I learned from that basically snapping turtles will grab them by the leg, and then it was quite gruesome, and then gradually disembowel them from below. Is that a threat? Are snapping turtles a predator of chicks or adult loons?
We certainly have them on the list as predators. From all my years, I've never actually witnessed it. They certainly inhabit, loons nest and hang out a lot in shallow, weedy parts of lakes. And, snapping turtles move around quite a bit, but that is their primary habitat. And you will see them right in the same area. We don't often get to see why we lose chicks after they're born. I will say that, although the exception to that, unfortunately, is with the rebound of the eagle population, we are seeing I don't think there's a single lake where I talk to people now about loons where they don't mention eagles. Either eagles coming and bothering the loons or nesting on the lake and attacking the loons or attacking chicks. And we've had many cases of people eyes seeing eagles taking loon chicks and actually killing adults as well, both on the water as well as on the nest. With snapping turtles, I think it's highly likely, almost all the literature, and I concur with that, I believe that they would be a predator of loon chicks, not so much adults, but I would say that when I led that project on Mount Desert Island that I mentioned for 5 years, I had a summer intern there from Colby College. And one of the things he witnessed was a snapping turtle had a hold of an adult loon by the leg trying to haul it off the nest. The loon actually got away. I'm surprised because I have some early teenage childhood experience with snapping turtles, and you don't want to mess around with a snapping turtle. An adult snapping turtle can really do some serious harm. So,
Abby says, I've had the good fortune to see loons mate. Each time they did the nesting ritual you mentioned just prior to getting on. Each time they did the nesting ritual you mentioned just prior to getting onto land for copulation. That is, they picked and threw leaves and mud. Is this common to have that behavior as part of the mating ritual?
Yeah, it can be. Sometimes these nests are built over a period of time. I've seen other nests that just seem to pop up like literally overnight. But it can that. I don't think I had a slide in there. I have slides of when I saw a pair copulate on Little Sebago Lake, and they were picking up leaves and doing some nest building right around that same time. So I do see that myself.
And Abby also asked, can you explain why the eyes are red? Why is the red eye an advantage for them?
I don't know all the physiology behind it. you know, there is just the belief that there is something about that, you know, aids their vision underwater. And how we would actually ever verify that, I'm not really sure. But that's always what I've learned or been told since my doing this since the 90s.
Abby says, I've been told about a loon circle described as a dance ritual with a large group of loons. When does this occur and what is its purpose?
I've seen a lot. We call it the circle dance, actually. And it is social in nature primarily. And you will see it at any time of the year when loons are on lakes in Maine or across the breeding range in all of North America. And the one thing I can say that I can't really explain is I've witnessed it, and it can be 2 loons doing it, or it can be 3, or it can be 6, or it can be 20. I don't know if I've ever seen a group of 20 do a giant circle, but I've seen 4 or 5 or 6 do a larger circle, all circling around one another, peering in the water, circling. What I've witnessed that I don't really know what triggers it is, they will seem fairly harmless and social, and then all of a sudden something triggers an aggression. And one bird will dive and come up, and a bird will fly up in the air because it's gotten hit from underneath, and all of a sudden they all scatter in different directions. I don't know what causes that, but it is very common. I interpret it as a lot of socialization, but it can also be posturing that, you know, when you have a pair of loons defending a territory and a third loon or more comes in and threatens them in that territory, you will often see them circling around one another looking, and it's almost like they're sizing one another up.
Just a couple more, and then we'll wrap up. Andrea says, can a loon go after a human? I've been at Watchick Lake swimming and have had loons pop up within 5 feet of me and then dive down again.
I've had that experience, not the experience of having a loon come after me, but I've had that experience of being in the water swimming and actually have loon surface quite close, which has been pretty great. I wouldn't want one to come after me though. They can move a lot faster than I can in the water, and I'd have a hard time fending one off. I will only tell you that, and I think it was just this year that I came upon a story somewhere, and it might have been Hancock or Sand Pond, which is down west of Sebago, where someone who's a distant swimmer has said that on multiple occasions he's been harassed and attacked by a loon. So there it is. I can't say I've ever witnessed it. I can't say it's certainly common, probably highly uncommon, but you know, he was in some way provoking that loon, or maybe that loon was just in a bad mood on that day.
And lastly, 2 questions. One is, how disturbed are they by motorboats, and how long can a loon stay underwater?
Both great questions that I've been asked a lot. I would say certainly motorboats can be disturbing to loons, particularly aggressive behavior by boats, by people that are uneducated or you know, not displaying good judgment in chasing loons by boats. Boat wakes can be an issue to loons who nest on shore. Their nests are right near the water's edge, and particularly if we're in high water times, can be threatened by wakes from boats. But I will also add to that when we talk and when we educate the public on threats to loons and disturbance, that we believe there's just as much issue with people in canoes and kayaks as there is with motorboats, because loons tend to nest and spend a lot of time in shallow water where there's either a lot of weeds and or rocks, which prevents motorboats from being in there, certainly at any speed. But canoes and kayaks can pretty much go anywhere. And so we do feel, particularly from disturbance of nests, that canoes and kayaks can be just as big an issue. And what was the second question, Carolyn?
How long can they stay underwater?
That's a good question that I know there's some stuff in the literature that I've read that I don't know really how they know for sure, because you were talking about snapping turtles earlier. Snapping turtles can come up to the surface of the water and just grab a little bit of air. You never even know they surfed. And I've seen loons do the exact same thing when they don't want to be seen. So knowing for sure that that loon, you know, when a loon dives, it can go any one of 360 degrees around you. And how you know for certain that it didn't come up and you're timing it, I can say that I timed a loon myself one time, just out of curiosity, to see when it was a case where I felt like I was in a place where I could really know if that loon came up at all. And it was almost 2 minutes. So they can definitely stay down a long time.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Lee, and thanks to everyone for joining us. And I'm going to ask Lee to send me information about how to contact him if anyone's interested in becoming a loon ranger, because it sounds like you're always looking for new people. So thank you so much, Lee, for sharing that. It was a great presentation. And just for everybody to know, oh, and there's a bunch of kudos coming through in the chat box, Lee. So our December, we are going to have a December program. It's the Tuesday during Christmas week. And people have specifically asked that we have a program that week. And it's going to be on fire on the Maine landscape. And we're going to have James Francis, who's the tribal historian for the Penobscot Nation, will be talking about Indigenous use of fire. And Alicia Black of the Maine Forest Service and Nancy Sfera of the Nature Conservancy will be talking about prescribed use of fire. And I think it's going to be a great, really interesting presentation. So I encourage you to check that out on our website under the events and register if you're interested. So thank you for joining us, everyone. And thank you again, Lee, and shoot me some information via email, and we'll put the recording up on the news page of our website if you want to send anyone to that who missed it and would be interested in learning more about loons.
Thanks so much for having me, and just let me wish everybody a happy, safe, and healthy Thanksgiving.
Yes, indeed. Take care, everyone.
Bye all. Take care.